Greetings, everybody. This is Jim from Civics of Freedom, and I want to talk about the gun ban. I want to talk about the Second Amendment, why it exists, the gun ban that's going on, and some of the factors that come into play. Now, there are a few things one needs to examine. One, if you were just to look at the situation without putting a lot of thought into it, you'll see that there are the two sides of the debate. You have the right and the left, the Republicans and the Democrats. Or is it? The first thing that has to be understood is that the two parties are not in opposition. I cannot stress that enough. Because when you look at it, you want to think that this party that you pin your hopes on has your best interest at heart. It doesn't. The Republicans don't. The Democrats don't. Okay? Let's just get that straight. The two parties are not in opposition. Now, how do we know this? Because no bill can pass Congress without both sides agreeing to it. Even if one side has a fair majority, they usually don't have enough of a majority in order for the bill to pass and then go up to the president. And if the president is of the other party, he could simply veto it. Right? Now, that being said, what is the main gun that they're going after? Well, they're going after all the guns. But the main gun, the main weapon that they really do not want the average person to have are weapons like the AR-15, the AK-47, the Ruger Mini-14. Basically, any weapon that is semi-automatic, has a decent-sized barrel on it, and can hold a sizable amount of ammunition. They don't care what caliber it is. If you have a Savage Model 64 22 caliber, well, guess what? That weapon, they'll tell you that's an assault gun. You know, and it's not. It's a range plinker. You know, that's something you go target shooting because the bullets are cheap. Is it not dangerous? It is very dangerous. Anybody that tells you a 22 is not a dangerous weapon really doesn't know much about guns. You know, they don't know much about political assassinations. You know, this is a weapon that you could walk around with and have 1,000 rounds in your person rather comfortably. You could use it for things like suppressing fire and covering fire. And someone goes, well, what are you going to do with that 22? I say, if I aim it at you, you will duck. I guarantee it. That's number one. But I digress. If we look at why do they want these guns out of the hands, it's not to protect school kids. You know, I live in New York City. There's never school shootings in New York. It's not because nobody here has a gun. Now, gun laws are very strict here, but the population is more heavily armed than one might believe. All right? There are a lot of gangs in New York. New York has always had a lot of gangs. Gangs of New York, right? The Warriors, you know, things of this nature. But if you look at a New York City high school has a police officer in it, not a security guard, a police officer. A New York City high school also has metal detectors, so it is very difficult to bring a weapon into school. Nonetheless, people do. People get those weapons around the security, they pass them through windows, all sorts of stuff. I remember seeing. But one thing you will not see is an active shooter come and attack the school because he feels like these people have bullied him or what. And the main reason for that is because the schools have gangs in them and that he will be fired upon by other students. Now, we would like to not think that this is the case, but this is the case. This is what would happen. Those guns that are very hard to get in will come out of nowhere. Believe it. But for the most part, it is the police and the metal detectors that keep this from happening. Okay, so yes, an armed guard in the school does work. I'm not saying arm the teachers. Most teachers wouldn't be able to handle a weapon properly. You should not have a weapon if you cannot handle it properly. If you cannot, use a certain amount of discipline. Owning a weapon requires some stuff. It requires you to respect it. It requires you to realize that death comes out the end. That there is a line of death any way you point it. So you can't just willy-nilly go and get a gun. If you're going to get a gun, and you should know the proper operation of it. You should know how to clean it. You should know how to load it. You should know how to use it safely. You should know how to store it. Okay? These are things. And then there's something called fire discipline and fire control. All right? That has to come into play when you're going to use a weapon. Fire discipline is knowing when to pull the trigger. Fire control is knowing where your bullet is going to go. because you are responsible for that bullet once it leaves the chamber. Okay? That's something that must be stressed. Cannot stress it enough. But why do they want to take these guns? What is the main reason that they want nobody in America to have the most common weapon in America, the AR-15? Well, the reason is this is the weapon that would be used by groups acting in concert in a variety of situations. Any situation, in fact, where the citizenry has to defend itself, whether that is it has to defend itself from terrorists, whether they have to defend themselves from illegals crossing the border, whether they have to defend themselves from corrupt law enforcement, whether they have to defend themselves from ethnic cleansing. You don't think ethnic cleansing can happen? It can happen. You don't think this could happen in the United States? Oh, yes, it can. Black people were lynched. What was lynchings in the South in the 60s? That was ethnic cleansing. What put a stop to it? It wasn't the police. It wasn't desegregation laws. It was blacks arming. The NRA handed rifles out. They made sure that these people could defend themselves. Okay? Everybody likes to put that stuff to the side. You know, you don't want to know when like that really happens. We go into back, you want to talk about like, well, back in the days of slavery. Has anybody ever heard the story of Brown's Bibles? Pastor Brown had a whole bunch of Henry rifles, and they were Brown's Bibles, and he used those rifles to fight slavery, to help free slaves, okay? Now, think, well, you know, we're in the 21st century, there won't be ethnic cleansing. Well, in the 20th century, if you were Japanese during World War II, you were marched into a camp. Now, those Japanese were released because we didn't have completely evil people running the country, but how hard would it be for them to have been simply made a non-issue? How hard would it have been for the government to just wipe out those people? You already have them in a camp. They already gave up their weapons, right? Now, we think that these things can't happen. Well, you know, there are a couple of incidents in American history that really have to be studied to understand this. And you have to go beyond the official story. Okay, because the government is never going to, they're not going to tell you the truth when you know the truth and everybody knows the truth. They'll still lie a little bit to make themselves look good. And some stuff they just can't admit to. They just can't. They just cannot admit to certain things. So now, if we look at the Clinton administration, Democrat, right? Democrats aren't going to hurt you. Yeah, watch this. There was a guy who believed that the New World Order was coming to get him. Well, it did. Yes. Randy Weaver saw his son killed, his wife killed, his friend wounded, because he sold a shotgun. That's what he did. He sold a shotgun. He sold a shotgun to an undercover FBI agent. And this shotgun was sawed off. They issued a warrant for him. He decided to stay and bunker down in his home. Well, they went onto his property. They killed his son. Now, how did that happen? The son was with his friend, the friend of the family, and their dog. And there was all these agents on the property. And the dog noticed the agents. Because you're not going to hide from the dog. The dog knows you're there, right? The dog can hear you. He can smell you. And the dog alerted the kids to this. What happened? An agent shot the dog. This kid, and he was a kid. I believe he was under 15. He might have been 12. Okay? This kid did what most people would do when you see your pet, a member of your family, get killed. This kid opened fire. And they killed him. Now, should that kid have opened fire? Probably not. But truth of the matter is, he was on his own land. Okay? And they killed him. Then, a day or two later, the standoff lasted for a long time. A day or two later, a sniper shot Randy Weaver's wife. I forget her name. And that's horrible of me. That's a name that should be remembered. I'll have to look it up. But they shot his wife in the head with a rifle while she was holding the door open with one hand and holding a baby in the other. So anybody who thinks that the government cannot be a threat, just realize that this woman who was unarmed, was holding a baby, was killed by an FBI sniper. Okay? It should be noted, this same sniper was at another famous incident from the 90s, and this would be the incident of Waco, in Waco, Texas, with the Branch Davidians. And now, you'll hear all sorts of stuff in the official story of how evil the Branch Davidians were. Were they? I don't know. I didn't know any. What I do know is that almost everyone there died. What I do know is that they burned them out. They used tear gas. They used all sorts firepower on these people. So now the American patriot community has sworn to never let these events happen ever again. So we come into, the 21st century, and under Obama, we see the incident that happened at the Bundy Ranch, where, they were, the Bureau of Land Management was actually killing off his cattle, and they were confiscating his cattle, killing it. They said this was over taxes, and maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. It doesn't matter. The point of the matter is, he decided to stand up. He felt he was right, and he decided to stand up, and people backed him up, because the rallying cry was, we will never see another Ruby Ridge. We will never see another Waco, not on our watch. And if you take a look at the pictures from that event, you'll notice that these aren't kids. This isn't the trench coat mafia that showed up. These are hard-working cowboys. These were militiamen who traveled from across the country. Literally, from across the country, people traveled to this spot. They brought their weapons. They brought their Ruger Mini 14s and their AR-15s and their tactical vests and their camo. And they were quite ready to do battle with the forces that were there. Thankfully, cooler heads prevailed, and we did not see a firefight. But we very well could have. It came very close. It came to fingers on triggers, safeties off, locked and loaded. It came that close, okay? There was another incident with the BLM. So it's the Bureau of Land Management. You really got to watch them, because when you see a lot of these incidents and you look at what's really driving it, it's the Bureau of Land Management. There was another incident with, again, cattle. Go figure, right? The Bureau of Land Management, and I believe this happened in Arizona, where the people turned to their sheriff, right? And the sheriff, in most places, the sheriff is the highest elected official. In his county, he is the highest elected official, directly responsible for his county. He is voted in by his people, and that's that. And this sheriff called the BLM and said, you're not going to do this. You're not going to do this to my constituents. And they said, well, we're going to bring a SWAT team down. This sheriff's response was, your SWAT team will meet my SWAT team. See, so now we see government fractured here, don't we? So things are not quite so stable. They're not quite so set in stone. And any government can turn on a dime at any minute. And we've seen this all over the world. Gun grabs are usually first. Do you really think if the average Jew in Germany was armed that they would have walked into Auschwitz? No, they would have fought. But what happened before the Jews were sent to the camps? Well, what happened was they were banned from owning weapons. They did the same story. It's for the children. The children, the children, the children. It's always for the children. And now, again, for the children. So what we see is, if you have an incident that fits the narrative, they will pump it. They will push it through the media, and they will use this repetitively to brainwash. It's sad, really, because people don't understand, and you'll point to the Second Amendment, and you'll say, well, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And the reason for that is, if the military forces are turned against the people must be able to defend themselves. That simple. The Second Amendment is not for hunting. It is not for home defense. It is specifically for war, okay? Do you understand? The Second Amendment is for war. It is for when the government declares war on its people. The people can fight back. Or if the government becomes too abusive, the people can alter the government by force. Now, you'll say, well, today, we have these militaries that are so powerful that how could anybody ever stand up to them? Well, we've seen that guerrilla forces can do quite well, actually, against larger more technically advanced militaries. We saw this in Vietnam. In Vietnam, America had its clock cleaned. And we won every battle. Think about that for a minute. We would bring to bear awesome firepower. We would bring to bear B-52s carpet bombing and F-4 Phantoms dropping napalm and Cobra attack gunships and C-130 Spookies and Spectres and all this stuff. If two forces met out in the open, the American military would wipe them out. The American military will wipe out just about any military it sees in a fair fight. Now, that's not completely true. A lot comes into, when it comes to military combat, a lot comes into play. Tactics, for one. If you're up against a good commander, you could have a hard time. No, I don't care who you are. I don't care what you have at your disposal. If you are up against a savvy tactician, you are going to have a hard time. But we do see that an army armed with AK-47s, moving their supplies by bicycle, was able to drive out one of the most powerful militaries the earth has ever seen. Okay, this is something that should not be overlooked. I know, where else have we seen where guerrillas armed with very simple weapons, we're not talking that cutting edge of technology here, we're talking very basic stuff. Well, you could look at the IRA, and the IRA was able to put up a fierce resistance for a very long time using the Armalite, the AR. That's what the AR is in the AR-15. It stands for Armalite. It's a manufacturer. Lots of gun makers make this platform, but I digress. So we see in multiple situations around the world that, yes, guerrilla bands can fight effectively if they're organized, if they're disciplined, if they're well trained. They could do a lot. Now, I'm not advocating for everybody to go out and buy a AR-15 and join the militia. In fact, I would say most people probably should not, because again, owning a weapon requires discipline. It requires consideration and compassion. If you're a hot-headed person, you should not carry a 357, because you're going to shoot somebody in a situation where they don't need to be shot, because you're going to get mad at traffic and just shoot them, right? And we see that. But then again, if it was really about saving lives, it would be about getting handguns off the streets, wouldn't it? If you take somebody who has a rifle for home defense, there's nothing sneaky about that rifle. If he comes out into his yard, you see he's got a rifle. He's not hiding it. He's not hiding it under his jacket. It's big. It takes up space. You could see it from far away. So there's that. But there are a few things that you really have to consider when you look at violence in America. Most of the gun violence happens in places where you're not supposed to have a gun. Go figure. And the most heavily armed places have no violence because everyone has a gun. So that if you go to some backwater town in Alabama to shoot up the local high school, odds are you're going to be outgunned when you get there, right? So honestly, with the mentality that goes on today, I don't know how I made it off that Boy Scout camp with all those rifles there. I really don't. Like there was a shooting range and a Boy Scout camp, so this will make people's heads explode. Yes, the children were firing guns safely. Nobody got hurt. People were learning how to shoot for good reasons. Well, that wraps up this episode of Civics for Freedom. I'm Jim. If you enjoy this content, please like, subscribe, share. I would really appreciate it if you would donate to the Patreon account or to one of the cryptocurrency wallets that are in the description. I would love to do this every day, but I need your help to do it. So if you enjoy this content, any help I can get to help get these messages out, because it is important, that would be really great. Thank you for listening, and you have